mentioned I'm going to butcher how you said it because it's been a long time since you said this. But you said that you had to know yourself, like the onboard of getting to that place where you could create a strong attachment, but not dissolve yourself in the process, was knowing who you are, what you wanted, that idiosyncratic way of you. What was I'm sure that is still an ongoing process. What does that look like for you?
Well, great question, because I'm not sure if you guys talk about the Enneagram at all on your show, but one of my best friends is Ian Cron for 40 years, who wrote The Road Back to You and hosts Typology, the podcast about the Enneagram. And I'm an Enneagram 2. I'm a helper or a giver. And so I have this motive inside out of my false self that says, if I help people and if I give to people and if I serve them and if I attend to them, then I will be loved and liked. And liked is more important than loved. Because if I'm liked, then dopamine just shoots through my body and I'm in a great place. So for me, Dan, part of this is losing myself was in giving myself away and being a codependent. And that played out a lot in my marriage. And if I didn't have a secure attachment, and I didn't even know what a secure attachment was, and I definitely didn't have one. I was an anxiously attached early in my marriage. I was a classic codependent, where if my wife wasn't okay, I wasn't okay, and I would serve and give and do anything and everything to try to get her to smile at me, or for her eyes to shine at me, or for her to say a kind word at me. And I was pretty detached. So my losing myself looked like detachment from what I wanted most, which was actual relationship. It looked like a lot of shame and self-hatred and self-contempt. So I had contempt around my own desires for connection, my own desires for sexual intimacy, which is what fueled a lot of my pornography addiction and other sexual acting out. And I think it made me a performer, somebody who, if I just looked on the outside like what I thought people expected me to be, then I would also be okay. And I never knew why I was so good at mimicking and impersonating other people. But from probably also around the age of 4, I was kind of the mascot or the clown in my family. And I did impersonations and sang songs, and I played the trumpet. And from about the age of 15 to 17, my father, who my siblings and I all think he was definitely on the spectrum with Asperger's, for 2 entire years, we only talked in cartoon voices. And I just thought that was perfectly normal. Like, he was Inspector Clouseau and I would be whoever. And it was fun. And I had a connection with my dad over that, but it wasn't an actual connection. It was this neurodiverse way of doing it. And I think the last answer to the question is I just hid a lot. I hid who I was through humor and through intellect and through busyness. Those really became drugs, idols, if you will, that I used to make my life work and to keep me from being vulnerable and needing other people. So I was very aware that I desperately wanted other people, including a girlfriend early on, but I didn't have the courage to date. I didn't know how to relate to a woman. And so a lot of self-sabotage in all of that. Is that helpful? Am I getting to the gist of your question?
Yes. And now undo that. What does it look like to undo that and walk towards attachment, especially towards God?
Well, you just need to get my new video series for $29.95 and your listeners will be able to know. Gosh, I wish I had a recording of myself, but I have 2 tattoos. And I'm going to hold my arms up like this, just so anybody on video. And I close the book with this story. I'm right-handed, so my strength is where I can overcompensate and where I can take hold of the world and think that I'm going to make life work. And I will, if you will, grasp. And so on my right hand, where I'm strong and competent, are the words "be still," taken from Psalm 46:10. So on the one hand, my work has been to learn to be still. And I actually think it's God's grace that with my trauma and everything else, it's often flattened me on my keister so that I had no other option than to be still. On my left hand, where I already have dysgraphia, so I can't write even with my right hand. But on my left hand, where I'm vulnerable and where I have limitations, it says be loved. And so it might sound like a superficial answer, but how we undo all of our hiddenness and all of our survival strategies is we learn to be still. And that's not just a spiritual thing with God, but learning to be still with ourselves. My experience of other neurodiverse individuals, as well as neurotypicals who have a lot of trauma, is that they have a hard time being present to themselves. I used to read over and over again the book Practicing the Presence of God by the 15th century monk, Brother Lawrence. Nicholas Herman was actually Brother Lawrence. And I'd say, I don't know why I can't practice the presence of God. And one day I realized, well, I can't practice the presence of Michael. So how can I practice the presence of God or practice the presence of my wife? How do we do that? We learn to be still. And for some people, that's not sitting in a chapel chanting or trying to do centering prayer. It might be going for a walk and just quieting themselves and listening to all the noises. This is a mindfulness activity that I'll do. I listen to all the noises as I'm walking around the 1 mile loop around my office that are farthest away. And it might be the traffic off on the highway. And then I try to tune into what are the sounds and noises that are up close the most. Oh, that's the vibration in the trees as the wind blows 3 feet next to me. Then what's the noise that's kind of in the middle space? Oh, okay, that's the hum of the lawnmower at Colorado Academy next door. And that kind of mindfulness practice with, and I'm being a little technical here because sometimes it's just a wonderful little walk to get fresh air. But while I'm walking, there's bilateral stimulation happening. So right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot with this mindful practice. And I'm now attaching to myself. I think this is one of the things that we often underestimate and talk about the least is attachment to self. And in Christian circles, sometimes anytime you put the word self in there, it's like, oh, that's a bad thing. We're meant to die to self. But the Bible actually never tells us to die to self. It says to die to our sinful nature or our false self, not ourself. And so as we think about connection and attachment, it's always on 3 levels. And I think of a triangle. The base of that triangle is not God, as we might think, oh, God has to be at the base. He's the foundation. No, I'm a self. I'm a separate person. And C.S. Lewis said in the last line of his novel, Till We Have Faces, he said, how can we look into the face of God unless we have a face? And so a person without an attachment to themselves is kind of a faceless person and will find themselves struggling to look into the face of God. So learning to be still helps me to connect to myself. Being loved implies that there's a source outside of myself, God, the divine love itself, that is gazing upon me, that is beholding me and longs for me to behold him. But then ultimately God's longing is for me to see him seeing me, which is the ultimate sense of belovedness. And then something in me neurologically and physically and emotionally can begin to settle and to rest. And then I like to speak of, out of that sense of being still and being loved by God, there's an overflow that happens. Like in Psalm 23, I think it's verse 5, where it says, my cup overflows. This effect or the result of being in green pastures and quiet waters and this restoration process that it says God is leading me in, the result of that is actually overflow. And that's the mark ultimately of a human being that's whole and healthy, neurodiverse or neurotypical. And this has implications for your earlier questions, but the mark of a whole healthy human being is overflow. And what I mean by that is that our heart and our nervous system is intact to the point when the love of God flows into it, that it doesn't go out all the holes and the cracks that are there, but it can fill up to the top and then spill over. And that's a life of joy and all the good things of the spirit, regardless of one's neurological status.
So sometimes when we're working with couples, the neurodivergent spouse might say, well, I can't change, I can't regulate, I can't quiet myself because of my autism. I dysregulate. That's just part of who I am. You're going to have to accept that. And I can't attach to you. That's just part of who I am.
Yeah.
Speak to that from your perspective as a therapist and neurodivergent individual.
Yeah. Now, I might not say these words to the client in that moment, but where I would go to eventually is it's not that you can't, it's that you're unwilling. And there's a big difference between willpower and willingness. What they're probably saying is, I've tried before with my greatest attempt. I put all my energy into it. I said, this time it's really going to happen, and it didn't happen. And willpower is us flexing our muscles and trying to perceive in a way that our brain can't do. It's like me trying to do calculus. I can memorize things photographically without any effort, but I can't find where my car keys are on any given day. And I can't do advanced mathematics, and I never will. So if a therapist said to me, Michael, I want you to do calculus right now in your head, I'd say, I can't. But if they said, I know that you've struggled to balance a checkbook, I can do very macro calculations, but this is just my true confession of I can't balance a checkbook. I've taken 3 Dave Ramsey courses, and I had 3 different people sit down with me and one of my best friends. And in the moment I can do it, but tomorrow I'll look at it and it's as if I've never seen it before. And so if a therapist says, Michael, I want you to balance a checkbook, and I say, I can't, okay, there's an actual limitation. But with relationship, if that neurodivergent spouse wants relationship, a posture of humility is, number one, always appropriate. But secondly, it's the secret sauce, because God tells us twice in the New Testament that he opposes the proud, which means self-sufficient or those unwilling to trust others. And then he gives a gift or grace to the humble. So I always invite people to understand humility, not as thinking less of yourself or thinking of yourself less, but as Thomas Merton, the great monk, said, that humility is being precisely who you are at any given time. So to that person, I'd say right now, it feels like you can't because of your autism, and you have some real limitations and vulnerabilities, but is there a willingness in you to learn, to be open, to fail, to consider the fact that you might not be perceiving and hearing things as they actually are from your partner, from your spouse, from your therapist, from your coach? And would you consider the possibility that in that humility of trusting the therapist and your partner with who you actually are and your vulnerability, that might actually create the connection? And I'm sure, Stephanie, you've seen this in sessions time and time and time again, but and we'll talk about the husband as both the neurodivergent, but this can be with anyone. It could be with a narcissistic client. It could be with someone with trauma or an addict, but like they're attacking, they're defending, they're reacting, and it's just creating this cycle. And then something happens where that man somehow begins to get in touch with his feelings or his heart, and he might tear up and he might soften and his posture might begin to relax. And you see the wife kind of lean in and something in her face softens. And then you process it all as the therapist. And what happens is that the superpower, what opened the door to the connection and the attachment, wasn't the perfection and the performance of, quote, doing the attachment work just right, but the vulnerability and the tenderness of, I can't do this. So therefore, full circle to pull the thread is, if I can't do this is communicated in a way like, but I'm willing and I want to understand your heart. And if I could communicate to you that the deepest desire of my heart is to see you have joy and light up because of me. Wow, I'd do anything for that. And that kind of humility and vulnerability actually creates the connection. So it's paradoxical, and it's not always something that you can just strategize to get to that point. But it can really be a wonderful moment. And we've seen that again and again in our intensives, and maybe because they're 3-hour sessions that we have with people, it unfolds a little bit more naturally. But, in my own life, my inability, my poverty, if you will, to connect has actually been the thing that has led to some of the greatest connections. It's that beautiful paradox of that when we are poor in spirit, that's when the kingdom of heaven happening here, opens up. That's when the experience of God and the fruit of the Spirit happens in our poverty. And therefore, I preach this all the time, and I think sometimes people get sick of hearing it. But whether it's my former sex addiction, my compulsive overeating struggles that remain today, or my proclivity to abuse alcohol, or today my neurodiversity, it's a gift that requires me to come to a place of acknowledging that I've got no game, that I'm going to project Psalm 51 onto my wife, that my wife doesn't want burnt offerings or sacrifices or for me to clean the toilets more consistently, at least not fundamentally, because her love language is acts of service, but she longs for my heart. And every man can give his heart if he's willing to be humble and to be seen for who he really is, not who he wants to be, and to trust. And the complication of this, of course, is you've always got two people in the room, and sometimes the very wounds of neurodiversity and the misunderstandings that happen make it so that tenderness is not always available and accessible. But I do see it as a gift. I didn't always feel that way. There were times after coaching sessions with AANE, our dear coach, Grace Myhill, where I would just click leave on the Zoom session, and I would just sit there and bawl, saying, I can't believe my wife has to live with such a broken man as me, and I'm so pathetic, and I'm never going to be able to love her the way that I want. And yet, as we've pressed through, the depth and capacity of my love is directly proportional to my inability to do that, and how I'm learning to give my heart. So feel a little bit like I'm rambling, but this is my story and I'm sticking to it, as they say.
What?
I was going to go, but you look like you were leaning in to say something.
No, go. You go.
Okay. So one of the things you were talking about in humility is, I don't remember how you said it, but being willing to admit that maybe some of the things I'm perceiving aren't accurate, maybe in my spouse or my therapist perceiving, right? Because if the amygdala in the neurodivergent person is larger and perceives threats that are there, I perceive you're not for me because you're giving me feedback that although I was trying, I didn't quite get it and we didn't quite connect. And now I feel something about that. I feel shame, or I feel angry, or I feel defensive that you're just not taking what I'm giving to you. Talk a little bit about how did you start to be able to receive feedback? So you mentioned that you had to kind of fight the I'm a lowly worm and it's just never going to happen, right? The shame hole, as I call it. But then the, okay, I am going to mess up, because we'll have couples try things, and especially the neurodivergent man, it happens once or twice, and maybe she's traumatized and she wasn't looking for it, or she wasn't, it's out of the blue, so she didn't respond correctly, or it didn't go the way that he predicted. It's like, okay, I'm done. We did it twice, it didn't work, I'm finished, but couldn't hear the feedback of okay, I wasn't prepared, or that just didn't go quite the way I thought it would be. Let's try again. The neurotypical might be willing to try it again, but the neurodivergent is like, yep, we've done it 2 times. It's a failure. Now the skill is dead to me. How did you work through that to be able to try again and keep being able to hear that feedback?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think God has given me a gift of stupidity, where I will, I'm the guy that keeps getting punched in the face, and I'll just keep getting up and keep trying and trying and trying. And I think that that's something I inherited from my parents, who were lower middle class, blue collar workers, and had a family of 5. And one of the kids early on was drug addicted in the early 70s, and my dad worked 2 full-time jobs. And so my dad said to my eldest sister before he passed, my dad was sober for 46 years, and all my aunts and uncles were recovered alcoholics. And he said, our family and our genetics are such where we have a lot of problems and a lot of mental illness and a lot of struggle, but we do something about it and we don't give up. And instead of saying I was hell bent, I'll say I was heaven bent. I don't know why, but maybe it's because of my early abuse, but my heart has always felt exceedingly hungry and thirsty for things to be the way that they should be. I think that's what Psalm 23:3 means when it says that he guides us on a path of righteousness or justice, the way that things ought to be. And so I don't want to be denied of the connection that I believe is possible. And this may not be everybody's story, but on the one hand, there's the neurodiverse aspect of how you said that the amygdala is larger. My amygdala is probably the size of a softball, and my brain itself is the size of a cantaloupe. So it doesn't leave a lot of room for other stuff, and explains a lot about my executive functioning. So there's that aspect of perceiving threat. I would say 90% of the first 20 years of my marriage, I perceived that Julianne was my enemy. And other people might not put that strong language on it, but I mean, I believed that she loved me in the general sense, and she would tell me that. And I had no reason whatsoever, rationally speaking, to think that she didn't love me, because her whole life was built around me and raising our family. And yet, in the moments of those threats where my amygdala would get activated, it was a classic Danger Will Robinson moment of, she is against me. She is not for me. I'm going to be exposed. I'm going to be abandoned or rejected or somehow made to be foolish or less or incompetent. And therefore, I have to use my defenses, which were primary intellectual or humor, to run around this. And so I would explain, I would justify, I would rationalize all things that just make women feel warm and really, really attached. I'm kidding. That would make her then become reactive and defensive, and the cycle would go around and around and around. And it's actually a miracle, apart from any of my sex addiction and betrayal 30 years ago, it's a miracle that we're still married. It's a testament to the grace of God and her good heart and the gift of perseverance. So I had to come to do work that was more a result of the trauma, which also set my mind and my brain in a sense of closeness and intimacy is not safe unless it's sexual, and I'm in control of that. And so the work was really my own self-hatred and my own self-contempt is what often fueled this belief, kind of projecting onto her that she couldn't possibly love me. So the more I healed from my own self-contempt and shame, the more, I won't say it went away, but the more space I had between stimulus and response to go, oh, this must be that neurodiverse thing. We have a code word. I know code words are a big part of communication for couples. I can become Robin Williams in a heartbeat. Like if you push my button, I'll do 50 impressions in 30 seconds and you'll be exhausted. And for maybe 25% of that time, you'll be laughing. And then you'll say, what kind of illicit substance did I take? So I'll start to do this. And we've had entire weekends where I've spoken in, British accents and things like that. And David Finch, who you probably know, his book, The Journal of Best Practices, he lives here in Colorado. And although we've never met, I actually came to accept my neurodiversity after 2 years of denial and resistance. I'm reading his book in bed one night, and it said, note to self, he wrote in his journal, do not speak to wife in a British accent. And I just burst into laughter because I have 100 different accents I'll do. And I think they're amazing and hilarious. And I could probably be paid to go to Las Vegas and do these large dollar amounts. My wife doesn't think so. She doesn't think it's funny. She's annoyed by it, etc. So when I start to do this, invariably, still today, our code word is Finch, thanks to David Finch and his book, Journal of Best Practices. And I go, no, not really. No, Finch, because I'm funny. It's like the bipolar person who's manic, who, they think that their craziness is actually pretty normal. And then my daughter, who's also neurodiverse, we were all cooking in the kitchen and I was making some voices and weird noises. And again, I'm thinking they're spectacular. My daughter says, Finch. And so that's like level 2 now. So we have another code word, and this will ultimately, hopefully answer your question. And the code word is ump. I never grew up with any professional sports. I don't know anything about the NBA or the NFL, but I know about baseball because I played up until 9th grade. So Grace Myhill, our coach, said, Michael, you love baseball. How about if Julianne has this authoritative word that when she says the word ump, everything stops. It's like Alpha, Kilo, Victor, DEFCON 4 command priority. When the pilot says that, you press the ejector button, you get out. So when Julianne says ump, I zip my lip, I put my head down, I go in the other room, I go for a walk, I shut up, I go, uh-oh, I am right now, my neurodiversity has literally put me under a bubble where I'm utterly unaware of how they're feeling, what they're experiencing, how they're annoyed, what their level of activation is. And there's a part of me that used to be ashamed that I need that. Like I'm a 60-year-old man with 2 graduate degrees and I've written 3 books and oh my goodness, I need my wife to call ump on me. I exhale and I go, well, of course. that's how God made me, or that's how before the foundation of the world I was intended to be, because we don't know how much trauma created this and how not, but that's who I am. And can I risk being loved? But if I'm defensive and think I can't be loved in that I'm quote that diverse, or sometimes I might say that I'm that broken, I can't then attend to her, and I'm going to push back against that word ump, and we're going to be living in separate homes, and we're not going to be having a ministry anymore. So in that moment, there would have been a time where I would have been, I can't change. That's just who I am. I'm just funny. I just crack jokes. No, that's my brain. And I have a say about whether I flip the switch on or off.
Yeah, it's good stuff. All right. Did you have your question now? Because we're starting to wrap up. So you better get it in.
Well, it's not so much a question.
Okay.
So that last thing you said took me back mentally to the definition of humility you had, and that is being precisely who you are, no more, no less.
Yeah.
And when you can learn to live there, you will accept the input that says, maybe I'm not seeing everything that is about me. It's similar to riding in a car, right? You're riding in a car, and depending on the car you have, you might or might not be able to see out every direction all the time. And having a person beside you say, hey, did you see whatever that is, or don't turn, or, whatever the thing is in the car. And you have a chance to disregard that and risk calamity, or you can accept that there might be some truth in that and hit the pause button on whatever the warning is. And it's a very similar behavior in this moment of, if I can recognize in the moment precisely who I am, and maybe that's not being 100% introspective in the moment, right? Maybe it's just accepting what someone else's perspective, not necessarily having to consume it all the way down to your depths, and say, you know what, maybe I should check that out before I dig my heels in. And that sounds like the perspective you've had in, okay, this is what the word ump means.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean go fall into my, as you use the word, shame hole.
Yeah.
It means, wait a minute, someone's trying to help me.
Bingo. Beautiful. That's brilliant, Dan. I'm going to use that analogy of the car. I mean, how many comedy routines have been told around men driving and their wives saying, honey, there's a car, or watch out, and it's like, why is it that we react and we're angry as opposed to saying, thank you? What a gift you are. I can't see that way. So I love that analogy. And ultimately, that's what's required for a neurodivergent man to be able to actually have the humility to say, yes, this is who I am. And I need relationship, attachment, and connection to others to be able to help me in my, no pun intended, but blind spots.
That's why they're called that, because you can't see them.
Yeah.
I'm already hearing like lots of women going like, yes, honey, see, I'm not controlling you when I suggest this, or when I say I'm seeing this, or, hey, you were over talking a little bit at small group. I'm not shaming you. I'm trying to help you. And maybe not all spouses do that in a nice, loving way, but
we're Ezra Connecto. We're here to help. We're here to rescue. We're here to walk alongside. And that in our Christian couples that we meet, sometimes the Christian man has a hard time hearing or finch. I've tried code words with many, many couples, and it's a very few that actually can use them and use them well without the man going, "You're controlling me." And then it's a tit for tat. Well, you don't think you've ever said that? Well, you don't think you've ever whatever? And it's like, okay, that's not how this works. Remember? Yeah. It's a help word. It's a bring it down word. But once someone says no, you mentioned enemy, and that's what a lot of the wives would say. He attacks me. He treats me as an enemy. Why am I his adversary? So it may be a strong word, but that's how many, many non-autistic wives feel, that I'm trying to help and do my help meet thing. And I get a punch in the throat trying to help. And it creates a negative cycle in the couple. Yeah. Well, you have shared so much with us today, and we're so glad that you were able to be on the show. Will you tell people where to find your book and about the other books that you've written as well?
Sure. The website for our ministry is restoringthesoul.com. We do intensive counseling with Christian leaders, missionaries, caregivers of all kinds, and clergy, as well as some people outside of that as well. The book Sacred Attachment is available everywhere where fine books are sold, on Amazon in particular. And then in 2013, I wrote the book Surfing for God, Discovering the Divine Desire Beneath Sexual Struggle. And then there was a documentary called Somebody's Daughter, and a book that I wrote along with that's now out of print. But those are the two books that are available on Amazon.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. We're going to do another kind of theme month about addiction and overcoming addiction. So I hope you'll be there with us. So as we end today, hun, do we got it?
So am I doing the first part?
Yes, you're doing the first part.
All right. That's the part you wrote down.
Yep.
That's good. So there's hope for your future.
And you're not alone on this journey.